Welcome to Issaquah Christian Church.
The last couple of weeks we've been starting the story from the Hebrew Scriptures and moving through. I talked about the creation of all things and humanity, and they're given their calling to bring that Garden of Eden order to the rest of the world. We see that turned into a major cycle of regression and a vicious cycle, but God is not done with that. He creates a people. Those people end up getting enslaved, and so last week Steve talked about their release from slavery and the need for a mediator to come and stand in the gap. And those pieces are going to come together a little bit today as we talk about kingdom and the stage of the story of basically we've been calling Jesus' family story, and how that begins to open up to our role and our calling in a pretty unique way today. We may have to commission you before you leave. Today I want us to think about a flourishing garden. It's a little too soon to plant anything, although the green thumbs around here could probably tell us we could be doing something. I'm oblivious to that, but that's fine. The soil's dormant, not much is growing outdoors. Enough to get my allergies going, but not enough to plant a nice garden, right? But in the summer, when the garden's overflowing, you can't find enough people to share with. Hey, do you want some cherry tomatoes? Because they're rotting on my patio, basically, unless I give them to you, right? There was a time when I grew up just north of Bellingham, but our church was right on the line in North Bellingham. And for the most part, when I was growing up, we didn't lock our cars in the church parking lot, except for a zucchini season. That's when you lock the doors to your car, because you'd have laying in the back seat of your car zucchini the size of sea otters just staring at you plaintively going take me home. And we're I guess I don't have a choice now. I mean, if they were on your hood, you just drive and whatever happens, happens. But in your car, you feel like some sort of responsibility for them. When I was young, I spent a lot of time in my mom's garden weeding and that sort of thing. And I learned how to stop a great zucchini harvest. You just take the little flowers off. And so thanks, Mom. I'm really glad to get that off my chest now. That's good. But some of you know the work of preparing a garden and removing the rocks and weeds and creating some sort of boundary for it, so that you can have a space for flourishing. In my neighborhood, if you really want a garden, you have to fence it off against the forest puppies. Because the forest puppies just come out and just munch on whatever they want all the time, right? And so if you want a serious garden, that's my wife. I didn't put the audio on here. But that's clearly my wife's videotaking and her plants as she talks to Mr. Munchies there, and he just totally takes over the garden. But my grandfather, Denny Grendel, was a green thumb. And he was a horticulturalist, and he would hybridize blackberries, and he would have a garden that would overflow in summer. And he lived on the beach in Suquamish. And so up and down the beach, everybody would have all the food, just summer greens constantly. And he ran a florist shop in Seattle for many years. And there are a bunch more stories there. But he took that green thumb to Kenya one time, and then it turned into a lifestyle of bringing life and hope and joy to a wasteland, really. He worked among the Maasai, and these are stories I want to tell you at some point. He and my grandma Jean took life and brought life to the Maasai there. I found, when I was doing a little bit of research, I found these pictures and some articles from 1976 from World Relief magazine, or World, I can't remember what the magazine was. I could look at it, World Vision magazine. And so take a copy on the back if you want, just to learn a little bit more, and borrow a book and pass it around, a book that was written about them as well. But these are two of my heroes that set a tone for me that I'm only beginning to kind of realize. Oh, yeah, those are my people. Those are my heroes. and what they did and the way they gave their life away. It started with just hey, when you're traveling on vacation, go looking on these missionaries, and then it turned into, I think 16 years, spending 6 months out of the year over among the Maasai, helping them flourish in a very tough and difficult time. But as we look into Jesus' family story, we'll see that God's domain, the rule and reign, where he was king, was like a garden that was meant to attract, not the deer like my wife's garden, but meant to draw the nations to wonder, what is this God like? Look at this amazing thing that he is doing among his people in his land. Even when they were a people in Egypt, they were in a little land that Steve was talking about, Goshen, which was flourishing, just like God was making distinctions even in Egypt, like, look at this, look at my people, even in this land. They're flourishing and growing like a garden is supposed to grow. In the ancient world as now, the gardens, the king's gardens, the hanging gardens, the majestic gardens were meant to show and put on display the wisdom and the wealth of a king, right? And these are the things like, look at how I've done it. If you read the stories about Solomon, he had like apes and peacocks imported from around the world. Like, come and look at my splendor, my glory. When we were down in San Antonio this June, we saw an old quarry at the Chinese tea garden turned into this just amazing place. In Finger Lakes in kind of upstate New York near Rochester, Sonnenberg Gardens, our family got to visit there. And you're just like, wow, look at the design and the planning and the wealth and the wisdom that goes into these things. Some of maybe our favorites around here, how many of you have been to this place? To Butchart Gardens, right? That was an old limestone quarry that was then imagined and reimagined, and it had done its work to create the Portland cement and do the work, and now it was tapped out as a limestone quarry, but someone said, that's not it. It's a wasteland now, but that's not it. And it takes a creative imagination to look around us as a people, to look around us at dark and broken places and say, oh, but that's not the end of the story. And we need each other, and more than that, our city needs us to look at those dark and broken places. I had this great conversation this week with a city official. He had sent an email out to a bunch of different churches in Issaquah. Hey, this is the thing going on in our city. We could use some help or want some conversation. I won't get too much into it, but I would love to talk to you afterward. But as I set up a little appointment with him, we started chatting. He's like, you're the only pastor that like hit me back on our offer to connect and have a conversation. I'm like, I'm sorry about that, but I'm here, and what can we do? And got into a conversation with him where I found out that he's a follower of Jesus and he works in our city. I'm like, okay, this is great. And I offered, hey, what if we went to some of the broken places in Issaquah and we just prayed together and walked around? He's like, I would love that. Right, so it takes a little bit of a spark and a little bit of overcome your hurdles. And I don't know what you think government's for, and I don't know what you think the church is for, but hopefully we're for the city. And let's see what God can do. It's fascinating conversations. I'd love to be a part of those conversations with you as well. But the initiative that it takes to turn bare limestone quarry into a garden like that, I want us to think about that. Because a well-ordered garden, using that metaphor, and some of you have the background, some of you don't. For those of you that have the background in the scriptures, you can think through the concepts of like, Israel is my vine, and I have planted her, and this is what it's supposed to do. And for those of you that don't have that background, no problem. I'll take us a trail through this little garden as well today. But there's a lot of flourishing and beauty that's meant to put on display the wisdom and wonder of our God. And that's what his kingdom is supposed to look like. And so we have a task. In the garden, they were to tend and to keep the garden. That was what Adam and Eve, the humans, were supposed to do, tend and to keep. Turns out those are words that mean ministry and work as priests. They're caretakers and priests. And you'll find out that so are you. In fact, I'm just going to say that the main point of today, if you're trying to like, well, what is he going to talk about? Just the we then are now God's royal gardeners. This This is his work. We are his kingdom and priests and royal restorers. We're God's gardeners, royal restorers. And we're on display proclaiming his excellencies. That's what we're about. So let's just take a look at this. As Israel was getting its feet under her, as tried to figure out what are we supposed to do, and now we're out of Egypt, and now we're marching into the promised land. What is this supposed to look like? Well, everywhere they went, there was somehow an oasis, and every time there was provision, and every time God had foreseen and his provision had placed for them, I've got you. I know what's going on here. I am going to take care of you, but you have a role in the world. You are going to be on display. You are going to be my treasured possession. So I think that a people needs these things, and this is what God presents to them. He gives them a calling. He gives a maintenance of those boundaries to who are you and who aren't you, and requiring their allegiance, and then continually removing the dangers. The Mr. Munchie Pants who wants to come and just chew on all your vegetables and all your flowers, right? The forest puppies. So let's just see how that developed until now. So let's just think about the calling. In Exodus 19, you saw what I did to the Egyptians, how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now, therefore, if you'll indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, you shall be my treasured possession among all peoples. Okay, so you will be my treasured possession among all peoples. We've talked about that from a historical standpoint. There was a time when all the nations got spread out to the corners of the earth, but he's going to start over with a people, one people. You're going to be mine, and through you, all nations on the earth are going to be blessed. You'll be my inheritance, my possession. I get you. And do you want me? So here's our covenant. If you obey my voice and keep my covenant, you shall be my treasured possession among all peoples. For all the earth is mine, and you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. It really sounds like they're the gardeners of God's domain, every one of them. They were all supposed to be kings or priests in his kingdom. Royalty, embodying his principles and living according to his lifestyle. And a kingdom is the domain or the area, the realm within God's authority and rule is felt. And some of us pray this continually. We say, may your kingdom come, may your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. We're asking for that ordered realm where God has it on lock down into this world where it seems so chaotic. And we're saying, we want your presence to be felt and your kingdom to come right here, right now. And then priests are intermediaries. They stand in the gap and they do a job to repair relationships. They reconcile and they figure out what the problems are and then bring the people together. And they're worship leaders and they're royalty. But then we had a problem. One reading of Scripture is that they were brought to the mountain of God and it's flaming and it's trumpets and it's smoke and it's earthquakes. And God says, come on close. And they said, no. He said, no, but you will be my royal priesthood. You'll be my kingdom of priests. And you can all stand in the gap for the nations. We can do this. And they said, no, have Moses do it. In fact, let's have his brother Aaron do it too. And a rejection of their role as ministers and priests, we'll just let them do it. And so God says, okay, well, Aaron and your family, you'll be the priests for what was supposed to be my priests, which was supposed to be for the world. So we've stepped into more mediation. How many of you just love the fact that you've got paid professionals in the Christian world to do the job of ministry for you? None of you, because that's terrible, because the job of anybody with any gifts in the church is to equip you to do it too, right? We're supposed to be and called to be these priests. And then there's boundaries. This is probably the one we know the most about because we see the Jewish people, the Israelites were a particular people. They had a particular thing about the males when they were born. They were circumcised on the 8th day. That was different. Not that every nation, not that no other nations did circumcision, but none did it in this way so as to set themselves apart as Yahweh's people. Circumcision. Food laws. Well, those are very obvious. We know about kosher and some of these things. I don't need to read the book of Leviticus to you, though some of you look like you haven't read it, and I understand that, but we could walk you through that someday too. But there's lots of laws, and okay, don't touch this, and don't do this, and these aren't the days to do that, because circumcision and food laws and festival days, and these things are very important to make them a unique people, like the domain of God, the garden of God, and they say, wow, something's different about that ordered nature. I wonder what that's going to produce. Well, it's supposed to be light and life for the nations, right? They were supposed to be a city on a hill, right? Carriers of blessing to the nations. And the other thing that was required is allegiance. And God knew from the start this was going to be a problem because they were going to have hard hearts. And so he's like, your allegiance to me is going to be so important that Yahweh and Yahweh alone is your God. And you don't look to the gods of these other nations. Yahweh is your God, and he is the creator, and you will worship me with all your heart and soul and mind and strength. Allegiance alone. It's such an important part. But he anticipated this and said in the end of Deuteronomy, Yahweh, your God, will circumcise your heart and the heart of your offspring. Okay, that's a different switch for circumcision, right? But there's something about their heart that was wrong and off, so that you will love Yahweh, your God, with all your heart and with all your soul, so that you may live. There's something that's going to happen, and it's anticipated. Something's going to happen later. And actually, we'll get into this next week. Turns out the story just continues to go along. And John will take us through some of the prophets who spoke of, okay, this day is about to happen, and you can see it on the horizon, this circumcision of our hearts. Because the boundary markers of circumcision are going to be a temporary thing, and what he's going to do is fix the problem of our heart. How many of you know you have heart problems? I mean, we have congenital heart disease. We have problems. And if you want to take offense at that, I get you, but it's been condemned. Your old heart has been condemned as selfish and broken and doesn't even know what it wants half the time. And so trust your heart. Well, trust your heart in which situations? Like there are some people that we would say, no, not that. No, don't trust your heart there. No, whoa, that ran off quickly, right? You can only trust your heart if it's a renewed heart, and God doesn't trust your heart. He trusts you enough to make you a new heart, and this is a big problem. But that allegiance, that believing loyalty, is something that He is going to have to produce because your hearts just can't do that. So we all know what went wrong on page 3 of the Bible. In the Garden of Eden, we know that the humans took the bait and they didn't eliminate the pests in the garden. But there's something that happened there. They relied on their own wisdom. They said, I'm going to do it. Why shouldn't I be in charge? A very common motif, yeah? But humans were removed from the lush garden and got to do what they wanted, rely on their own wisdom and their hard hearts and hard ground, and off they went. And as the nation is being put together under covenant and sent forward, the dangers that are being announced to them look like this in Deuteronomy chapter 4. Beware, don't do what the nations do. Don't raise your eyes to heaven, and when you see the sun, moon, and the stars, the host of heaven, the host is like the meaning of like the armies, the host of heaven, you be drawn away and bow down to them and serve them. Things that Yahweh, your God, has allotted to all the peoples under the heaven. The Yahweh has taken you and brought you out of the iron furnace, out of Egypt, to be a people of His own inheritance, as you are this day. These are dangers from without, dangers from the outside coming in. Be the people, your calling and your boundaries and the allegiance and being aware of the dangers. This is so you can accomplish the purpose, which is to bring a blessing to all the world. And if you fail at this, well, He's going to have to continue to repair their failures. But there were dangers within as well. And here's one warning that we'll get into in a sense, because the prophets would declare, and Moses anticipated, you're going to want a king instead of God. You're going to say, why can't we have a king like the nations have kings who were sons of their gods? I mean, that's what every other pagan nation has, a king that is a divinized king, a son of their, god, whether that's in Babylon or Egypt. And so they're going to want a king who's head and shoulders above the rest and goes out, and you're going to want another person in between you and me. And so there's dangers within that their desire to have a king instead of God as their divine leader is going to keep more and more separation, a loss of direct relationship with God. They stepped back from the mountain as priests, and then instead of having God as their king, they said, let's have another king here. And you're just seeing the separation of distance between them. We'll look at the prophets, just a touch. We can't do much with them, but we'll look at it a touch next week. And the prophets were always these outsiders saying to the kings who didn't want to hear it really, you're not doing it right. You're not holding to the covenant. Remember what the covenant is? You're not doing it right. And they would say, off with your head. Get out of here. We're not interested in this other report. Moses understands that they're going to want this. God gives them divine information. They're going to want a king. And it's going to be their choice. But just know, this is the role of a king and anyone in leadership. He has shown you, O mortal, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? Just to do justly, act justly, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God. So important. And so the kings and the prophets and priests look forward to the day when God himself would arrange our hearts. He would come and become king again, and that his garden would be on display. They lived in the imagination of this and debated furiously, what's it going to look like when God comes back to take his throne? And alternatively, how do I get to be a part of it? And an early part of the kingship so that I can ride on those coattails and be a beneficiary as well. And then Jesus comes on the scene and says, God is becoming king again. And they're like, what? Okay. And so everybody's imaginations got alerted, like, so it's going to look like I said. It's going to look just like I was saying. God's becoming king again. It's going to look exactly like this. And someone else said, no, God's becoming king again. It looks exactly like this. And then someone else said, no, God's becoming king again. It's going to look exactly like this. And so when the kingdom of God is announced, everybody's like, okay, he's going to do what I've always wanted him to do. And Jesus arrives on the scene and says, the kingdom is going to be built on the weak and the powerless. Like, what? Who wants to sign up for that? You have the good life. Check you out, you who are being poor and oppressed. Like, you get the announcement of the kingdom first. Congratulations. And he builds it on former paralytics and addicts and broken people and all this kind of stuff. And the strong and the mighty, the kings of the earth, are going to have to just put up with it, because this is what it looks like when God becomes king. He doesn't roll in the tanks. He anoints the meek and the mild and the people with former issues that are now becoming resolved in this kingship. And so you do see things like justice and upheaval in society and the upside down values of God's kingdom versus human kingdom. And when Jesus teaches, people get their minds shredded and their imaginations were just like, no, but this can't be, because I know what it's going to look like when God becomes king again. Do justice, love mercy, walk humbly with your God. And then Jesus arrives on the scene and does all of that. You're looking for a king? Well, this is what he does. In the years before Jesus came around, the rabbis would teach and teach and teach and teach about, make sure that when your generation is done, that this is what it looks like. that the poor are upheld, that there are no broken issues and systems, that this will be resolved in your time. You're responsible for it. And I know this maps over with a lot of social justice warrior kind of stuff, and so I'm treading on thin ice, blah, blah, blah. It's the Bible, for goodness sakes, right? So yeah, throw out everything about SJWs that you want, whatever. It shouldn't be a religion and all that. But under God Almighty, what do we do with the wasteland we've been given? I just want you to think about it. What do you do with the wasteland you've been given? And you're like, well, I retreated behind a gated community. I'm like, okay, well, maybe you need to step into a few wastelands then. But what do we do with the wasteland that we are given? Does God have to transport you like he did to my grandparents and say, here, boom. The Maasai can no longer be a nomadic people hunting for water. They can't travel 80 miles to go get water every day. It's not really practicable. It's not going to work. So my grandpa builds reservoirs and does not handouts even. He's not the SJW with the social justice warrior with the handouts. He's like, I want to give them a hand up. He's like, if they sell their cattle and fund 80% of this project, I'll find 20% in the US and we will fund this reservoir project, And so he's got Maasai warriors who cattle is my life, is my wealth, and they're now selling these things to participate in their own redemption as he builds reservoirs so they can just have water out of a spigot and water their, and do all this stuff. It's a great story. Great story. But it's justice and it's mercy and it's humility, but it's not necessarily like the way the world's going to present it, right? And so don't get tripped up when I say, and I quote Jesus and say, this is what he's going to do. In fact, Jesus starts showcasing God's teaching on love and justice and peace as the true fruit of God's kingdom. God's kingdom is arriving. What are you going to expect? Well, this is what he does. He comes to Nazareth, Luke 4, where he'd been brought up. And as is this custom, he went to the synagogue on the Sabbath day and he stood up to read. And the scroll of the prophet Isaiah was given to him. So he unrolls the scroll and finds the place where it is written, "The Spirit of Yahweh is upon me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor." I can just imagine he's glowing by now. And they're like, what's wrong with this guy? What's happening? Right? The Spirit of Yahweh is upon me. And he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim liberty to the captives and the recovering of sight to the blind, to set at liberty those who are oppressed, and to proclaim the year of Yahweh's favor. And he rolled up the scroll and gave it back to the attendant and sat down. And the eyes of all in the synagogue were fixed on him. And he began to say to them, "Today this scripture has been filled to the full in your hearing." Everything that Isaiah was talking about is like, and it's happening. What? Whoa. So I want to just kind of double click on this passage in Isaiah 61 and just read it to you. Like life over you. This is what Jesus inaugurated. This is what he began. This was in Nazareth, his statement of this is what I'm doing. "The Spirit of Yahweh God is upon me, because Yahweh has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives, and the opening of the prison to those who are bound, to proclaim the year of Yahweh's favor." And Jesus left this part out. We can have debate about it. "And the day of vengeance of our God, to comfort all who mourn, to grant to those who mourn in Zion, to give them a beautiful headdress instead of ashes, the oil of gladness instead of mourning, the garment of praise instead of a faint spirit." Now listen for the garden coming up here. "That they may be called oaks of righteousness, the planting of Yahweh, that he may be glorified. They shall build up the ancient ruins. They shall raise up the former devastations. They shall repair the ruined cities, the devastations of many generations. Strangers shall stand and tend your flocks. Foreigners shall be your plowmen and vine dressers. Gentiles, outsiders, strangers, that's us. Foreigners shall be your plowmen and vine dressers, but you shall be called the priests of Yahweh. And they shall speak of you as the ministers of our God. You shall eat the wealth of the nations, and in their glory you shall boast. Instead of your shame, there shall be a double portion. Instead of dishonor, they shall rejoice in their lot. Therefore, in their land they shall possess a double portion. They shall have everlasting joy. For I, Yahweh, love justice. I hate robbery and wrong. I will faithfully give them their recompense, and I will make an everlasting covenant with them. Their offspring shall be known among the nations, and their descendants in the midst of the peoples. All who see them shall acknowledge them, that they are an offspring Yahweh has blessed. I will greatly rejoice in Yahweh. My soul shall exult in my God. For he has clothed me with the garments of salvation. He has covered me with the robe of righteousness, as a bridegroom decks himself like a priest with a beautiful headdress, as a bride adorns herself with her jewels. For as the earth brings forth its sprouts, and as a garden causes what is sown in it to spring up, so Yahweh God will cause righteousness and praise to sprout up before all the nations. Isaiah 61. At the end of Isaiah, in chapter 66, there's this call to the nations, an announcement that there's a new creation coming. It's the wolf lie down with the lamb kind of stuff. Like, whoa, what's happening? This is different. And it's an announcement not just that Israel, and not just a tribe within Israel will be the priests, but it says, and some from the nations also I will take for priests, says Yahweh. I'm going to gather some other people. This garden is going to grow into and bless all of the nations, and I'm going to have kings and priests here too. And so today in our cities and our neighborhoods, we're charged with a high calling to be royalty, priests, sons and daughters of the King. And the way I learned that was, won't that be the day when that all happens? That's what I learned. So I can just put it in park at the Overlook and just watch God do it all. Except for, remember, he wants human partners. Somehow we're supposed to be a part of the renewal of all things. It still awaits us fully and finally, but here we are in this kingdom and priests, and so we bring about the renewal as in heaven, so on earth. May your kingdom come. May the domain where your reign and rule is felt come on earth. And Peter, one of the first disciples, probably the oldest disciple, and one who had lots of run-ins with Jesus and struggled to get it right, he says, you know what, you followers of Jesus, you allegiant ones to the Messiah, you're a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for his own possession, that you may proclaim the excellencies of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. Once you were not a people, but now you are God's people. Once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. These are words for us today because we weren't the chosen people of God, but through Christ, the chosen one, we now are. So, congratulations. You have an assignment, right? He's made us kings and kingdom and priests. You look all the way to Revelation in the end, and you see that he's made us a kingdom and priests and made us priests of God and of Christ. And the main thing I was just, trying to share with you is this idea that God wants to partner with us in the wild and waste. He wants to partner with us in the broken, dry ground. He's preparing for us the work that he wants us to walk into. And today is just a soil check. Are you ready? Can you get out a shovel and can we just see, are we in this? Do you trust that God has got you? Are you ready to stand in the gap and in the broken places on earth? And you're right if you say this, but that's going to hurt. And I'm going to suffer. And Jesus says, join me. But that's not clean. In fact, when you garden here, it's broken and it hurts and there's just problems and there's pests and he says, I will be with you to the end of the age. And they say, but if I give my heart, I will suffer. Like, yes, like Jesus says, yes, you will, and you will see life spring up from the ground. I just want to challenge you, if you're kind of looking at some of these dark places and going, well, I don't have love to give, compassion, forgiveness, service, well, receive his love. If you say, well, justice is, advocacy for the marginalized and working to see, equality and righteousness in a broken world, and you want peace and seeking, to bring communities together, and where am I going to find the resources for that? And we're all looking at, right? We're looking at the cross, the nexus of love and justice, where Jesus says, I'm right here, I will be with you. And so I just have some questions for you, the royal restorers, God's gardeners. Just some pesky pastor questions. I want you to think and just say, where are the broken places around you? Some of you, that's your family, 100%. If you look outside of there, spread a little bit. That neighbor on the corner, spread out a little bit further. That area of town, spread out a little further. That encampment, wherever. Where are those places of brokenness? And if you are God's royal priesthood, do you think he's going to stand behind your work? Well, that's a yes. So do you trust him to direct your paths even to desolate places? I would encourage you to just ponder that and think that through with Jesus and let that resonate in your heart. His desire is that we would be called oaks of righteousness, the planting of Yahweh, that he would be glorified, that we would build up ancient ruins and raise up former devastations and repair the ruined cities, the devastations of many generations, to be called priests of Yahweh from the nations, ministers of our God.